Hello and welcome. Today I will talk about Hitler's view on Mussolini and Italian fascism. This is a very interesting topic because on the first glance it looks pretty clear that Hitler loved Mussolini and the Italian fascism because they were also allies in the Second World War. But if we look into the sources, we can see it wasn't that clear that he really liked them. While he did like Mussolini, especially at the start, he did not really like the Italian fascism. He saw many flaws in it, and especially later in the war, the relation between Germany and Italy really cooled down. But let's begin in the early 1920s. There, Hitler was not really famous in Germany. He was just part of the German national movement, the party, and he really tried to basically overthrow the government in Germany. And who was the perfect role model for this? Mussolini, who did exactly that with his March on Rome. So, what did Hitler do? He looked up on him and saw this basically as an example of a nationalistic power to overthrow a democratic government. For this, I want to quote directly Hitler from Mein Kampf. It was only in Italy that there arose a man who, with a firm hand, seized the reins of government and put an end to the process of disintegration, Mussolini. His success showed the world that a determined will could overcome the paralysis of democracy and the chaos of socialism. So Hitler really saw Mussolini as a role model at that point because he was able to march into Rome and basically defeat Hitler's most hated enemies, liberal democracy and Marxist socialism. He hated both of them, and Mussolini did exactly what Hitler wanted to do as well. So it was pretty clear that Hitler tried the same as Mussolini did. And this happened in November 1923, where Hitler basically tried a march on Berlin from Munich. It was called the Beer Hall Putsch because it started in a beer hall in Munich. However, it didn't work out, and in the end, Hitler got imprisoned. In a speech he held on his trial in 1924, he basically said that it was Mussolini who tried to initiate. I quote, "We sought to follow the example of Italy, where Mussolini marched on Rome and seized power for the Italian nation. Our march on Munich was to be the first step towards a German revolution, a new order inspired by the Duce's vision." As already mentioned, the beer hall putsch failed. Hitler came into prison. There he wrote Mein Kampf, and he really realized that it wouldn't work on Mussolini's way. He could not overthrow the German government with a national revolution. So, what did he do instead? Basically, he created a new way and he wanted to do it the democratic way. He wanted to get elected and then spread a national revolution and take over the country and basically become a dictator. But Hitler's admiration for Mussolini was also an ideological level, because basically both hated liberal democracy, both hated Marxism, but they were very nationalistic and state-centric. They also believed in the collective will of the people. So they had quite some common ground with also being quite militaristic. Hitler saw both of them on the third way. They both had out of his vision a Weltanschauung. At this point, he really only saw the positive sides of Italian fascism and didn't really look at the negative sides. However, he will see them later very clearly. I will quote Hitler again. Fascism and National Socialism are born of the same spirit. We both stand against the decadence of liberalism and the destructive force of Marxism. Mussolini has shown that a nation can be reborn through the will of a great leader, and we in Germany shall build upon his foundation to create a new European order. However, the both great ideologies had also great differences. For example, the foundation. If we look at fascist Italy, we see something that emphasizes cultural superiority and looks at the history, basically wanting to recreate the Roman Empire. However, on the National Socialism side, we see more the idea of biology, basically having a Aryan race. It is more a racism instead of a culturalism. This is very much what Hitler really criticized about fascism or Italian fascism. Here I quote, Mussolini's fascism is a noble endeavor, but it is incomplete without the racial clarity we have achieved in Germany. The Italians are a mixed people, lacking the purity of the Aryan race, and thus their system cannot reach the heights of National Socialism. Yet, the Duce's work is a vital step towards our ultimate goal. So Hitler really saw Italian fascism basically as incomplete, as a step in the right direction, surely, but not as the ultimate goal, something that has to be still involved and basically be added the biological part. But what did Mussolini think about Hitler? Well, when Hitler came into power, Mussolini was not really the happiest. He didn't really see Hitler as a friend or an ally in the first place, rather than rather really a rival of the authoritarian regimes in Europe, because Germany was obviously not the strongest nation in the first place at that point, but he saw the potential of Germany, and he really saw that if Hitler would get strong, he would be a real rival for the basically the dominance of the European continent. And there was a problem over the influence, and this problem was Austria. Hitler already said early that he wanted to annex Austria and basically create a greater German solution with Austria included. However, Mussolini saw Austria under his sphere of influence and wanted to keep it. Engelbert Dollfuß's government in Austria was basically a puppet of Mussolini from Italy, and the tension really got hot when Austrian Nazis assassinated Dollfuss, creating an instability in Austria, even to that point that Mussolini mobilized troops and sent them to the Austrian border to basically show Germany, if German troops enter Austria, Italian troops will do the same and will fight you and kick you back out of Austria. So there was really a high tension, and this is important to note that during the early stages of Hitler's rule, there was a real rivalry between Hitler and Mussolini. They were not allies at all. So at that point, basically Mussolini dismissed Hitler as a volatile upstart. Nothing to take too serious. He saw Hitler that he will fail. Hitler, on the other hand, still liked Mussolini and admired him, but he saw clearly that Mussolini's stance was basically a block for his ambitions. And this created a real problem, because then the Allies came in, and the Allies didn't really like Hitler rising to power and wanting to expand, right? So before they had Italy basically isolated as a fascist power, they kind of limited the influence of Italy and made the life for Mussolini hard. But now they saw Mussolini as basically an ally against Hitler, because they also wanted to limit the influence of Hitler and Germany at that point. So they improved the relations with Italy again, especially during the time of the Austrian crisis. So in this early stage, even though having similar enemies, they did not really were allies. They kind of saw themselves as rivals, even though their basically sphere of influences only basically bordered at Austria, because Hitler early on wanted to focus on the east and conquer Lebensraum for Germany, while Mussolini was very focused on the Mediterranean Sea. He wanted to create the second Mare Nostrum, so wanted to conquer the territory around the Mediterranean Sea, which were kind of different goals both had. So they, even though they were not real enemies because they want to expand into different directions, they were also not real allies because they had not one goal in common. However, being first rivals, this changed. And this was with the invasion of Italy, of Ethiopia. Italy invaded Ethiopia and had there some trouble. And the League of Nations still really like Mussolini for invading Ethiopia, so they decided to sanction him. The Allies sanctioned him, and he was again isolated. What did Hitler do? He actually sent weapons to Ethiopia to get some revenge for Mussolini, to basically preventing him from doing the Anschluss early on. But well, what happened now? Both nations were isolated, and the Allies tried to limit their influence. And especially after Germany basically remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936, they both saw basically that it would be for mutual benefit to cooperate and help each other, because they know, yeah, we are both isolated and we have a common enemy and common people that want us to be isolated and ultimately basically defeated. So they decided to work together instead of against each other. From this point on, the alliance really grew stronger. Hitler praised Mussolini a lot and talked about their shared goals, etc., their shared revolutions, and thus leading to Mussolini allowing Hitler basically to annex Austria in the Anschluss. So first opposed, they were now together and allies. So the allies themselves basically tried to isolate both nations. And what happened? Those isolated nations worked together. So those nations they saw as enemies were enemies before, but now they were allies because they were both isolated. We can clearly see here that the alliance between Italy and Germany was an alliance that basically was created due to the isolation politics of the Allies. Then came the Spanish Civil War, where they both Hitler and Mussolini sent troops to basically help Franco's nationalists in Spain. And they were basically fighting against the Republicans that were Soviet backed. So there we had the first clash really between the Axis powers, so Italy and Germany, in Spain against the Comintern's or the Soviets. In the end, 1939, the Spanish Civil War was won by Franco due to his help from Italy and Germany. However, in 1937, Italy joined the Anti-Comintern Pact, which was basically a pact against the Soviet Union. But what is interesting here? Who else joined the pact? This was Japan. This was basically the first real treaty where Japan was on the side of Germany and Italy. Why was that? Well, Japan had a war in China going on, a pretty brutal war where they did quite some war crimes. Who didn't like that? Well, the League of Nations, Britain, France, USA. So Japan quite got bullied, let's put it that way, from the League of Nations and all the other nations. So they were quite isolated. And well, we see three major powers being isolated by the others, and all were quite nationalistic. Well, what happens? They want to basically collaborate and create their own allies, basically, their own faction. Jumping again to 1939, more precise, in May 1939, the Pact of Steel was signed. A pact basically between Germany and Italy, basically strengthening their military bonds. However, this alliance was not quite from mutual partners because Germany's industry and military force was just so much stronger than Italy's, and it often overshadowed Italy, basically making Italy as kind of the junior partner. And exactly that's what we also see during the whole Second World War, with Germany being the clear leader, while Italy being more the little boy. Here I will quote: "The bond between Germany and Italy is forged in our shared struggle against the decaying democracies of the West and the Bolshevik threat in the East. Under Mussolini's leadership, Italy stands as a cornerstone of the new Europe we shall build together." So then the Second World War started. Germany invaded Poland, and then 1940, France. Italy in the end also invaded France and took a bit of territory. However, in late 1940, Italy tried to invade Greece through their basically Albanian occupation. So they attacked Greece, and how went it? It went horrible. They suffered high casualties and could not push the Greek back. So that was the first time where Mussolini was a bit like, we need help from Germany. So he asked Germany to help. What did Germany do? Germany invaded Yugoslavia and then directly pushed through Greece and basically defeated Greece quite fast, actually, in relation to how long Italy needed and how many casualties Italy needed to actually only gain a little bit of territory and even get pushed back by Greece. So there, Mussolini was quite humiliated that the great Italian army could not defeat the Greek. Hitler saw this as the first sign of kind of incompetence from the Italian side, but he really was of the opinion this was a one-time mistake. In the future, it will surely be better. But what happened then? Well, the war broke out in North Africa, and Italy had a big army actually in North Africa stationed and should actually defeat the British, who were way numerically lower than the Italians. But what happened? The British absolutely annihilated the Italians. They really destroyed them, and Mussolini was humiliated again. And he didn't like it, but he had to ask for help again from Hitler. And Hitler was quite annoyed by that. He really saw then that the Italians were not quite helpful, but that they actually drew manpower from the Eastern Front then to basically North Africa, because they had to keep North Africa in order to basically defend also the Italian peninsula, because the danger was if North Africa was taken by the Allies could easily land a naval invasion of Sicily or southern Italy. So it was really important to keep North Africa. So Hitler created the Deutsche Afrika Korps. The German Afrika Corps was basically formed under Rommel, who before led the famous Ghost Division in the invasion of France. The Panzer Division that was always before the front line and has sometimes completely lost connection to the real front divisions because it was so far ahead of the other divisions. So he was quite capable, but at that point he actually was not a real corps commander, but only a division commander. So he got promoted and sent to Africa. And what happened there, he pushed the Allies very far back, and then the Allies pushed him again, then he pushed the Allies to El Alamein, and etc. It was a back and forth, quite some brutal warfare, but in the end, even the British still won in 1933 later. But however, in 1942, Hitler praised Rommel. In a speech in 1942, Hitler said, I quote, Rommel has shown what a German commander can achieve with limited means. His spirit embodies the will of the folk. Well, this was on the one side a prayer to Rommel for what he achieved, which was great. But on the other hand, it was quite a strike against Italy, against the Allies, because it basically told Mussolini that, yeah, a German commander can achieve with limited means great victories, while the Italians with great means can't secure victories, but basically gets defeated. It was kind of a sidekick against Mussolini as well, but overall it was praise for Rommel. So Hitler saw there again that the German military was superior, the German spirit was superior, etc. However, what is quite funny about basically Rommel, who was called the Desert Fox, his capabilities, was basically that he not really embodied this German spirit Hitler spoke about, because Rommel was quite, well, not listening to his chief commanders. He was not listening to his superiors, and this was quite un-German because the common German general always listened to the man above him. However, Rommel often did the opposite of what they told him to do. Even though they clearly said to him, you are not allowed to do this, he still did it. And this was quite un-German and was not really the German spirit Hitler praised. But Rommel in the end still had great success, and no one could blame him because of this. If he would have failed miserably, then he would have gotten quite the blame, and probably Hitler would have said, yeah, he didn't embody the German spirit of listening to their superiors. However, this just on the side. So this whole war in North Africa and later also in Italy itself costed Germany quite some men that they had to draw from the Eastern Front and put basically there, which gave them additional problems logistically, when it comes to weapons, resources, and manpower. So it quite harmed the process on the Eastern Front. And Hitler really saw there then Italy was not the greatest ally they could have had. And later he will even say that he regretted being an ally of Italy. However, this was the first part of the two-part video about Hitler's view on Italian fascism and Mussolini. I hope you could learn something. I hope you liked the video. If you have any comments, write it down. If you have any recommendations or say you want to criticize me, you can write it down. I'm open to discuss, etc. Just keep it civil. If you like the video, give the video a like, and I'm happy you watched the video. So I wish you a great day and bye for now.